Have you ever watched somebody add watercolor to an ink drawing and thought, there's no way I could do that? Well, the truth is, you absolutely can. In fact, by the end of this video, you'll know the simplest pen and wash technique for beginners, which is a really straightforward method that I use for adding watercolor to ink drawings. And they look beautiful, keep lines crisp, and they take away the fear of ruining your artwork. If you've been wanting to try watercolors but don't know where to start, then you are in the right place. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Aaron, and if you're new here, this channel is about helping aspiring illustrators become more confident with pen and ink drawings. And over the last two videos in this series of bringing your ink drawings to life, we've covered so many aspects of ink drawings and watercolor. We've explored using watercolor to describe light and shadow. We've discovered that transparent washes can make your drawings feel more alive. And today, I'm going to show you the complete workflow I use over and over again. Whether I'm drawing a face, a figure, an urban sketch, this simple process, it really does help me stay relaxed and enjoy watercolor without feeling overwhelmed. Remember, the goal isn't perfection. The goal is to learn more about pen and watercolor using these basic principles while having fun and enjoying the process. All right, so let's look at this drawing. I started off with a pencil sketch because I wanted to make sure the composition was accurate. And before watercolor even touches the paper, I got to make sure this ink drawing stands out on its own. So think about your gesture, your construction lines, and your proportions. I'll be using a Faber-Castell Pitt Artist pen. I'm using the 0.3, which is the smallest size in this set of four. These pens are phenomenal. They feel amazing in my hands and are 100% waterproof when dried. Perfect for pen and watercolor. So I use my photo reference of this gentleman to describe the light source, which I might add is probably one of the most important parts of any ink drawing and watercolor sketch. The light source is from above at a slight angle, and it's a 50-50 light source, which just basically means that about 50% of the object is in shadow while the other 50% is in light. This will help you when you need to add in darker contour lines. Once you know where the light is coming from, add just enough hatching to explain the form. In this ink drawing, I wanted to show you that ink hatching lines doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, I'm using a very simple way of using hatching just to block in the darkest values. This keeps the entire composition of the ink drawing easier to follow once you begin to add watercolor. And remember, determining the light and shadows and where they dictate shifts in value is the most important skill to learn. When you're using watercolor to help describe form, that's what you're going to be thinking about through the entire process. So don't be too heavy-handed with dark hatch lines. Keep them on the lighter side. That's one of the biggest shifts in thinking. Watercolor isn't replacing your drawing, but it's complementing it. Now comes the fun part where we get to play around with watercolor. For this fun ink and watercolor sketch, I will be using the Lightwish 100% cotton watercolor sketchbook. I'm using a simple collapsible water basin to clean out my brushes. The brushes are a synthetic squirrel mop brush from Cobia. They are excellent for traveling and post beautifully. These have become my favorite brush by far. For my palette, I upgraded since my last video to this portable Schminky watercolor set. I love these Academy Aquarelle paints because they are professional quality at a less costly price. Plus, I love the size. By the way, I'm not sponsored by any of these brands. I simply try out these supplies and use what works. These art supplies can easily be found in my art store linked in the description. Okay, one of the biggest mistakes beginners make is mixing paint that's too thick. For this lesson, I want you to think of watercolor more like tinted water or tea rather than paint. Load your brush, then add enough clean water to create transparent washes. You should still be able to clearly see your ink lines through it. It's much easier to darken watercolor with another layer than it is to make a wash lighter after it's on paper. Start light, and you can always build value later. Now, instead of chasing tiny details, look for the large shadow shapes. Keep asking yourself, where's the light and where do you want to protect the white paper for highlights? What planes face away from the light? These are going to be your dark areas. And this is how you become familiar with form. Light and shadow describe the form of objects. Paint those shapes first with a light watercolor wash. The watercolor is simply connecting the shadow shapes into one unified pattern. This one step alone can completely change how your drawing feels. Now, the next step is to let the watercolor dry. And this might be one of the hardest steps, but you now need to take a moment and wait. Seriously, just take a moment, a minute or two, if you have to, and just walk away and wait a little bit. One of watercolor's greatest strengths is its transparency, but that also means it's easy to create muddy colors by constantly brushing them over damp areas. Touch your paper gently to feel how damp it is. Wait until it's almost completely dry. Patience keeps your washes looking fresh. It will give you your next layers a more crisp and wonderful look. As the paper dries, you'll notice beautiful soft transitions that are difficult to create with pen alone. That's the beauty of watercolor. All right, so the next step is to add a second wash. Now, this wash is going to be a little bit darker in value. And now that everything's dry, you can see with fresh eyes where the darker values need to be added. At this point, you'll be loading your brush with paint and using slightly less water. To get in deeper shadows to describe the form, you're going to want to do this. This man and his environment, they do have shadows from that light source. So choose just a few areas where you want more contrast. Under the man's hat, the back of his pant legs, his backpack, which is mostly in shadow anyways, beneath his nose and cheekbones, or even where his clothing overlaps. That's where I'm going to add this next deeper value. Use less water this time to create a slightly stronger watercolor mixture. And by layering only where it's needed, you create a lot of depth without making the drawing feel messy. Once your watercolor is completely dry, you can return with your pen if you want to get in a little bit more detail or hatch marks. Or do what I did and give it one last layer of paint, which is going to be your darkest details and darkest values. Together, they create a very balanced illustration that's fun, it's playful, but it still does a very good job of describing the form of this man walking on the sidewalk. And if there's one thing I hope you remember from today's lesson, it's this: you don't need to master watercolor before you start using it. Start with one drawing, one brush, one color, one simple wash. Just get in there and start laying down some paint. Each page was going to teach you something. And remember that creativity is a gift from God. Every time we practice observing light, form, and the people around it, we're learning to appreciate the beauty of His creation while faithfully developing the gift that He's given us. If this video helped you, I'd really appreciate it if you just subscribed and shared it with other artists who maybe they've been hesitating to try watercolor. And in this next video coming up in the series of bringing your ink drawings to life, we'll learn how to use watercolor and simple hatching together to create rich textures, strong focal points, and more expressive illustrations. Until next time, keep creating, have fun with watercolor, and never stop developing the gifts that God gave you. God bless, and I'll see you on the next one.